I think we're probably at a pretty good point to transition to another category. Do you want to do nutrition, or do you want to go into hormones since you've kind of introduced the topic?
Yeah, let's go into hormones.
Okay. All right. Well, the general public sees all these freak-looking athletes, whether they're playing in the NFL or bodybuilding or in the UFC, and will immediately, if they see somebody that's super muscular, that they have a lot of muscle mass, they'll immediately identify that person in two ways. One, they're a badass, and two, they're using steroids. Well, if you just watch the rest of that movie, you'll see that as often as not they get their ass kicked, and they come out in the first half of their event, or even the first third of their event. They are pretty formidable. They do extreme things with power, but then very often it's not well-directed activity. It's not polished. It's more like what you see the Hulk doing whenever he goes into his green rage. It's just unmitigated force that is not necessarily well controlled, but it's not durable. That's the main thing, and it's because steroids cause massive changes in the body. They prepare the user for doing short-term extreme work, but at the same time, there is, as we talked about earlier, as Brad first mentioned and then I mentioned, we have all these things that are inversely proportional. If you elevate the capacity to generate extreme force over a short period of time, then at the same time you lose your endurance. And it's because steroids cause profound changes within the body. They alter the cardiovasculature. If you look at the blood vessels of somebody who's doing steroids, you'll see that they look really vascular, big veins sticking out all over. And if you see pictures of guys in magazines that are juicing, they'll typically have big veins. I would show you my arms, but there's such a lack of veins, you'd know very quickly. I guess you know very quickly that I don't use steroids. But so it would be an example of showing what's not, which is kind of hard to illustrate something that way. But at any rate, there is a price to pay for using steroids, and I think most athletes are done more harm than good by using steroids. And it'd be interesting to see how Conor McGregor does in his next fights, because he's put on 20 pounds of muscle, and at his age, there's really, you got to use hormones to do something like that. There's just really not another way. But everybody gets seduced by the wanting to be that guy and look like that guy, and then ultimately they get embarrassed. So in general, there's probably a handful of dogs that would benefit theoretically from using steroids, and a handful of people who do, but they would be definitely in the minority, and they got to know when to stop. Everybody lies at some point on a continuum. Every dog lies somewhere on a continuum with respect to the balance of strength and endurance. And I don't doubt that there's quite a few dogs that would be a little more perfect in where they lie on that continuum in terms of having the most strength while at the same time having enough endurance. But we're not talking about doing what's traditionally done, and that is full 8-week periods of being on anabolics. I think there's probably quite a few dogs and people that could benefit from 3 weeks, because at 3 weeks you don't have the profound cardiovascular changes. You invoke some positive changes, such as well, one in particular that will invoke this change is well, two that I can think of. Testosterone and Winstrol will increase the percentage of red blood cells. So the hematocrit goes up, red blood cells carry oxygen, so the endurance would go up after about 3 weeks. I know that because my doctor has me on testosterone. Didn't make me mad, but whenever the doctor suggested it, I went along with it, and I feel better. You know, I'm 2 weeks away from being 70 years old, and life is enhanced by having the hormones of a younger man. Basically, it's just elevating a natural hormone to the level that was normal at a younger age. I actually advocate for most guys as you get older. If you're in a position to do that and you can have it supervised by a doctor, I think it truly improves the quality of life. But one thing that goes along with that is hematocrit is elevated. Hematocrit is the total percentage of your blood that is comprised of red blood cells. And there are some issues that go along with that. But putting it in a different setting, if you wanted to improve the endurance in a person or in an animal, elevated testosterone will probably bring the hematocrit up maybe by about 3 or 4 points. And you know, Winstrol one time was actually prescribed for that, for treating anemia, elevating the percentage of red blood cells. So that's one thing that goes along hand to hand with some of the anabolic steroids and with testosterone. Testosterone is basically the pattern whereby anabolic steroids are created. There's two components of these hormones. There's a rating of how anabolic is each one of these chemicals, of these hormones, and how androgenic is it. So anabolic refers to growth. To what extent will it cause growth? And androgenic, it refers to the capacity for this hormone to elevate male maturity characteristics. As a male matures and he starts getting more and more testosterone, you'll see certain muscle groups increase. You'll see facial hair and body hair increase. Deltoids, traps, these muscles tend to get especially large whenever your natural testosterone increases. Again, those are androgenic properties, and all synthetic hormones are created and rated on the basis of how anabolic is it compared to how androgenic is it. I think Mother Nature got it right. The amount of androgenic properties versus anabolic properties that you get from testosterone is probably near ideal. So to finish up a line that I was referencing, one thing that I have to do by virtue of being on prescribed testosterone is I have to give blood every time that I'm able, every 2 months. Otherwise my hematocrit gets too high. An ideal hematocrit for a dog or for a human, if you're looking to maximize your ability to breathe during activity, during doing work, is around 52. That means 52% of your blood is comprised of red blood cells. And if you were looking for a target area for your dog so that he would have the maximum capacity to breathe and to have enough oxygen to support his activity, Uh, if you 52 would be a good target. If you get higher than that, then you have a danger of blood clots. If you go lower, a lot of dogs are going to fall in at 43, 44. They can definitely get better. You have the ability to increase the oxygen carrying capacity for that animal by 20%, which is huge. It's profound if he's dialed in at the ideal level. So what we've talked about here in our attempt to begin to address hormones is that there are intended effects, some of which can be attained by very nominal use. There are different ratings for different steroids, different ratios of anabolic properties to androgenic properties, and there's a crap load of different kinds of anabolic steroids out there, each one having its own unique ratio of those two properties, those two sets of properties. I'm sure that for the people who hang out at gyms and are aware of all the steroids that are floating around in the gyms, you'll see everything from various kinds of testosterone, enanthate, sustanon, cypionate, each of which has a different set of chemical properties. Cypionate is a water base that goes in and out relatively quickly. Sustanon is 3 or 4 different kinds of testosterone blended together, usually occurring in a very concentrated form, anywhere from 2 to 400 milligrams per milliliter. In your hardcore bodybuilders, that's what they use. Anadrol, probably the dirtiest one of all, but the one that has the most effect, the quickest. That one is life-changing. Wouldn't recommend it. Certainly not on a dog. Winstrol is one that's a water-based, otherwise known as stanozolol, and it seems to be a steroid of choice for a lot of people. I think the strength response on it is pretty quick, and it also has a tendency to lean out, to accelerate fat burning. I've actually heard it said, but I've not actually studied the molecular profile. I've heard it said that there's a tail on the stanozolol molecule that actually resembles the thyroid molecule, which is the hormone that's responsible for basal metabolic rate. In other words, how much fat your body burns just sitting around. So the implication was that by virtue of being on the stanozolol, your body would have an elevated basal metabolic rate, and you would burn fat and stay leaner and get stronger. And that's kind of close to the holy grail for a lot of people who go to the gym. And then there's a whole different set of issues about using these things on a female. There are some inherent risk. Heard a lot of stories about people using anabolic steroids on females, and then some of them never come in heat. Again. So I would exercise great caution with that. So in general, I would, with respect to steroids in particular, I would recommend caution. There's a lot of ways to screw up, and there's a lot more dogs hurt by steroids than are helped. Mother Nature does a pretty good job balancing things out, and unless you really know what you're doing, you should probably just leave that alone. Hormones are not just about steroids or testosterone. There are other hormones that are anabolic. Growth hormone is an anabolic hormone. Insulin is an anabolic hormone, but I don't know of anybody who's actively giving either one of those things to their dogs, and certainly it's not anything to play with. And I wouldn't recommend. To start with, I don't even know where you would get canine specific growth hormone. You could probably try human growth hormone. It's very expensive, and the benefits would be very nominal, especially in the short term.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of different steroids, there's a lot of different time frames, and there's a lot of different dosages. Yeah. And so if you have all of those different variables, just saying I'm going to use some steroids with my dog,
yeah,
is what are some of the harms that you could have from overdosing or going for too long with the dog, if that's something you decided to do?
Just for the most part, there's two primary probable issues with a male, and one of them is that you use too much and you have dialed up your strength at the expense of dialing down your endurance, and the dog falls flat on his face after a short period of time. He's a rock star for a short period of time, and then he's a victim. So if he's given the task of bringing down a boar, that's an endurance activity. You're not going to pick him up and slam him and then get your trophy. That's not the way it works. It's an endurance activity, and if he's not prepared on all levels to be able to endure past what the hog can endure, then he's going to be a victim. So that's the number one thing: dialing the strength up and the endurance down, and then after a short period of time falling flat on your face. And then the other one is the price that you pay down the road, unless you really know how to massage the situation to invoke a growth phase in the testicles after the cycle with the steroids. Then your dog's gonna probably not gonna produce any sperm or a low level of testosterone also for a long period of time, and you may never get pups out of him again. Now, if you do use it and you are required to take some kind of corrective action to try to stimulate the testicles into resuming normal production of sperm and testosterone, there's a medication called Clomid that is a stimulant for the testicles, and there's another one that I'm a lot more familiar with called chorionic gonadotropin. It's essentially the same thing as NPG 600, which some guys will try to use to bring a bitch into heat, which incidentally it will often bring a bitch into heat, but in my experience that they're very seldom fertile. They'll come into heat, you breed them, you don't have any puppies. But at any rate, chorionic gonadotropin will elevate sperm count in a male dog. I can say that for sure. It will be harder in a dog that's had long-term steroid use, and I'm not sure that I could say that it always works. I don't think it always does if you've had a dog that's been on steroids for a long period of time. Be a good time to be able to hear questions, because I'm sure there'll be 1,000 of them, and most of them would probably center around, well, which steroid should I use?
No. You may not need anything.
That's the takeaway, is that in most cases you're going to be far better off not to even use them. It's dangerous to the proposed outcomes for your dog, but probably if I was absolutely had my arm twisted up behind my back, forced to answer that, I would probably use one of the testosterones, probably a nanthate. It's oil-based. A weekly injection is probably what's normally recommended. and a light dose of probably 100 milligrams a week. The other one that I would possibly recommend would be stanozolol or Winstrol. Every 2 or 3 days, I would give probably between, most Winstrol, the veterinary version of Winstrol was 50 milligrams per milliliter. It's a water-based, so you have to give it more often. Every 2 to 3 days. It seems to keep the serum levels where they need to be, instead of just going totally up, totally down, and then starting over again. You got these overlapping bell curves. So probably anywhere from a quarter, probably starting out at a quarter of a milliliter every 2 to 3 days, and then working your way up to ultimately half of a milliliter every 2 to 3 days. And then if you got your hog hunt coming up, I would stop either one of these a week before the event, because you will have fluid retention from either one of these hormones, that your dog will be a better athlete without the fluid retention. So that's pretty much what I could tell you.
So what would happen if your dog has a 50 hematocrit, is just like a perfect athlete, doesn't need anything, is ready to go to his show or his hunt, and then you start adding these things to it?
You're going to bump him off the top of Mount Olympus, and he's going to be on the side of the hill somewhere. You're going to diminish him. He's going to go from being perfectly balanced, and balance is a huge part of being fit. Balanced in relation to the activity you plan to do. He's going to gain more strength, probably gain a little bit of weight. So whatever peak or ideal weight you've selected for him before, he's going to be above that, probably a pound, and some of it's going to be fluid retention. But strength is up, endurance is down. He's going to be a less perfect fit for his work activity.
So adding anything without getting blood work done and knowing whether you need it or not is just a foolish thing to do.
I absolutely think so.
Okay.
It's playing Russian roulette.
Yeah.